The chapter is called The Salt and the Pepper of the Relationship. And for me, the salt is the trust and the respect is the pepper. And so I put those on the XY axis. I love making these 4-quadrant graphs. And what I saw was that if I'm high on one dimension and low on another, there's very predictable behavior that one could expect. And you could expect what dynamic that would create.
So Andy, in chapter 4, you really get into trust and respect in this relationship between the two. Can you talk a little bit about how you built that together?
The chapter is called The Salt and the Pepper of the Relationship. And for me, the salt is the trust and the respect is the pepper. And so I put those on the XY axis. I love making these 4-quadrant graphs. And what I saw was that if I'm high on one dimension and low on another, there's very predictable behavior that one could expect, and you could expect what dynamic that would create. To make it real, it would be great to bring in some of my own life experience, because I think it's always theoretical until you put yourself in the graph. So for me, for instance, that x-axis of trust and the y-axis of respect, when I was starting out with my relation with Ronnie, my now wife, she, said, Andy, I don't really want to be exclusive. And that was really not comfortable for me. So what happened was I respected her very much. I wouldn't have been together with if I hadn't. But my trust was low. So we're calling, if it was a scale of 1 to 10, that was a 2 or 3. So what happened in that is that I was showing up in what would be then the top left-hand part of the quadrant, which would be skeptical. So I was skeptical of her. So what would happen? Of course, she'd get a text message while we were together, and she would privately look at it, or she would do some behavior, and immediately all of my distrust would arise, which means that I was very skeptical of everything she was doing, and not trusting like where we were going in a relationship. So I'm all in, and she's sort of still like keeping her cards close to her chest. And of course, what happens is once the distrust is there, it'll build up over time, and inevitably it led to probably our biggest and one of the only arguments I really remember was just I exploded. I was like, no. Like this isn't happening. Either we're doing this or we're not doing it, but I'm not going to play this game of, kind of, oh, I got to go out and have a phone call or something. Like, no, that isn't working for me anymore. So that was where I was in that quadrant with her. And then it would be nice to share kind of where I had a lot of trust, right, the x-axis, and then a low level of respect was as we started going out, say, year 1 or year 2, we're very different beings. I love introspection and self-development. And Ronnie, I mean, not that she doesn't want it, but she's not particularly interested. She wouldn't go to a self-development course. It's not her thing. But I would see areas where she was having problems, and I would sit in my, call it arrogant state, and think if she just went to that one course, this would solve it. And then my judgment towards her built up over time. So the respect showed up with something like she'd have a problem, and instead of me supporting her there, I would be just very dismissive. I wouldn't be very thoughtful, and quite frankly, I'd be a bit arrogant and very manly in that solution-oriented, like let's solve this, instead of just be present for her in her process. So we'd show up. I showed up pretty much in the early part of our relationship with a low trust. In the first, say, years as we were trying to build how we were going to, say, interact around difficult discussions, I had a lower respect. And thankfully, I had my mentor that smacked me around. And I'd say that we pretty much live in that healthy relationship now. I very infrequently will we drop, but if we do, we deal with it very quickly.
So let me ask you a question about that, because that first example you gave, you were looking at trust and respect and how she was acting, and you had a low trust.
Yeah.
Why is it your responsibility to deal with that and not hers, considering of where she was, the situation she was creating with her reactions? Why would you take on, why would you take on that responsibility to yourself?
Yeah, it's funny. This topic will come up a lot throughout the book and in our discussion is that it wouldn't be my responsibility, it would be my responsibility to myself to be aware where I'm distrustful, because it'll come out in how I interact. So the issue isn't should I trust or not trust. No, not all that dissimilar from the story you shared of your mother. The issue comes now that I'm distrusting, I blew up instead of, because I wasn't conscious of it. It was a very deep, painful place for me. And now the call it the alternative to me blowing up would be, Ronnie, I see that we have trouble in our relationship because I can't trust you. And if I can't trust you, then I don't know how we can proceed unless that changes. Like that would be a conscious use of it. So the trust stays, but how I interact with it shifts.
Right.
In the interaction.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the exercise, you have the 4 quadrants, and now with what you've talked about using them, how do you hope or expect that your readers are going to use that tool or through that exercise as they go forward for their relationships?
Well, the exercise is basically take 2 people, like a person you trust and a person you don't trust, and then plop them on the graph. And what I found is that the feedback came that there was a lot of uncomfort was the word, because as people were plotting people in their lives, they started to see that they weren't as trusting as people as they had imagined. Because once you scale it from 1 to 10, you're like, well, maybe it isn't a 9. It's sort of more in that 5, 6 frame. And so the feedback I got or have received from this specific graph was that once you've placed someone in, there's automatically a self-reflection of, okay, how am I behaving towards that person? And then, as I said, the first chapters are really about awareness, self-awareness. So what are they meant to achieve? It's meant to sort of be a mirror. So you look and say, oh, okay, that's not comfy, but now I see where I can begin to take some responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.